I started working as a virtual company in 2003. So this was not a huge, the pandemic and all that was not a huge adjustment for us. It was like, oh, okay, this is how we've been doing this anyway. But that learning curve of how do you remain connected with each other? How do you protect your culture? If you're a business owner, how do you protect your culture?
Yeah.
When you're not face to face? How do you make sure that you've got habits and processes and practices in place that can replace those water cooler conversations or those quick drop by, hey, can I just run something by you for a second?
Hello and welcome to The Real Bottom Line. Today, my guest is Teresa Eastler, and I'm so excited to have her share her wisdom with us today. Welcome, Teresa.
Hello, hello.
Let's start right where I like to start with a lot of people. You are an entrepreneur. You have your own business. Was that a straight line to get to that? When did you break the when did you break the bounds of working for somebody else?
Well, I put my toe in it first. So the last corporate job I had, I left in 1984. So that was the last time I had a job. But prior to that, when I was working, I was a vice president at Bank of America, and I was a terrible banker. I think I just knew I was a bad banker. I was not, I was not cut out for the corporate world. But I always had side gigs. I always had kind of side hustles where I was consulting with small businesses and helping them figure out how to operate better and how they could grow their companies. And but I didn't feel confident about going out on my own. And then I did. 1984, I left the corporate world, and I've not looked back.
That's awesome. Were you always in the communication side, business coaching, communication side of the business?
Well, I was more, as an entrepreneur, yes, always.
Yes, okay.
And I always worked as a business coach also. I have a knack for business. I love it. I absolutely love business. And I have a knack for it. I understand it. It makes total sense to me. And at the essence at all of it, everything always came back to communication. In order to accomplish anything in your business, you have to be able to communicate effectively. So they all just fit together.
That's interesting. And I know one of your businesses was, it was kind of in the tech field, and you were doing interesting presentations. I imagine back then they were cutting edge, but now, what was cutting edge back then?
Oh my gosh. Well, one of the things, like in the late 80s, like this is pre-tech boom, like early days of the tech boom. Those serendipitous things that you could never predict. My company fell in cold calling, like dialing for dollars, early days of business, and got introduced to a startup based in Toronto that worked in what we now know as the computer graphics industry. And this was like early days. And it was the beginnings of computer graphics, animation. And this particular software company was the software company that did, like, back then it was the Abyss, when they had the whole water thing. But it was also industrial design. So that was the launch into the technology field. So it came in like the really cool, fun, sexy stuff that was happening in computer graphics and CG early days of it.
Oh, wow.
And then that just branched out into other technology companies.
Absolutely. The interesting piece is I think back on when you have a ways to look back, right? Because it's 84 to now. What if you could say, what have you been your biggest lessons as a business owner?
Ooh,
That's a
boy.
tough one, I know.
Yeah, boy, if there was only one.
We are on a time limit, Teresa.
Oh,
So
well, this one has really been resonating with me a lot lately, and particularly as I look back over those years, and one is that there are no mistakes, and don't be afraid of making mistakes, and don't be afraid of failure. Because
that's huge.
you work in finance, and we'd all like to think that when we invest, it all just goes in a straight line up, and it doesn't. Business is tough. It's hard work, and there's sleepless nights, and it's not just all fun and roses, and it just works out according to plan. Anybody who's in business has setbacks. Anybody who's in business has times where it doesn't go according to plan.
Yeah.
So the lesson is to embrace that. It's not easy and it's not fun, and to persevere, because oftentimes it's the last man standing who wins.
What is it? You don't fail unless you don't get up the last time.
Yeah, just keep getting up, figuring it out. What's my next thing when it looks like there are no options left, find the option. You just don't give up. Keep working at it.
You've probably seen a lot of changes over this period of time too, in how businesses run and everything. What has stayed the same through that period of time? Is it that perseverance thing, or what else is there that has stayed the same?
Well, I think perseverance, that's gonna always work well for anybody in business. It just don't give up. Just don't give up. But the other piece of it, and I think we're really challenged by this, and I see this especially because I work in communication, but we're so challenged right now with our ability to be connected with others. And technology, as incredible as it is, our ability to do this that we're doing this morning is amazing. And in many ways, it is a barrier. And that ability to connect with other individuals, with people, like people to people, is the thread that's always all through it all. We are human beings first, and we need connection with other human beings. We need to feel that we're not alone and that we're isolated. So that is true no matter what. That has not changed over these years.
What have you seen that's changed the most?
How we do business, like the technology has really influenced everything. Now most recently, how we work virtually has been a huge departure for a lot of people, and all of the learnings that have happened through all of that. I started working as a virtual company in 2003. So this was not a huge, the pandemic and all that was not a huge adjustment for us. It was like, oh, okay, this is how we've been doing this anyway. But that learning curve of how do you remain connected with each other? How do you protect your culture? If you're a business owner, how do you protect your culture?
Yeah.
When you're not face to face? How do you make sure that you've got habits and processes and practices in place that can replace those water cooler conversations or those quick drop by. Hey, can I just run something by you for a second? How do you still have that and work in a different way? So I think those are some of the biggest changes that we're all facing.
Yeah, and going, but and if it comes to into a hybrid situation, or
Right.
some of your team members now work in totally different areas, that adds another level of complexity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear
Um,
from a lot of my clients, the cultural piece is a big thing. How do we protect our culture when we've got so much fraying on the edges and
mm,
so many um, challenges against it? So that's a big one for a lot of companies right now.
yeah, for sure. And so how did you set it up so that you made your culture has remained, you obviously, since you've been doing it in 2003, you've got the secret sauce, Teresa. What is the secret sauce for you? I know it's not the same for everybody.
Yeah, over communicate.
Okay.
That's it, is communicate more than you think you need to. And because we tend to under communicate, and especially if we're feeling isolated,
Mm,
we kind of get into our own little bubbles, and that's the easiest thing to do. But when you get into your own little bubble, as soon as you start seeing yourself do that, reach out to somebody, immediate reach out, and have one of the things that is the most important thing, and the simplest and not necessarily the easiest, is to have regular meeting cadences,
mm.
have regular times that are scheduled and set up, that you have communication, and don't change them. Don't say, oh, I got busy with something else. Keep them a priority, because that is going to reinforce that culture, and that brings you together, and that keeps that connection in place.
Awesome. Thank you for that. My next question has to do with your numbers from a business perspective. I find a lot of entrepreneurs are the once a year throw everything into a box and hope for the best. And if there's money in the bank account, obviously things are good. So, how has your relationship been with the numbers? Has it evolved over time?
Yes, it has. And I am not one of those once a year throw it in a box and hope it all turns and I have some money left over. That would create way too much stress for me. And it has evolved over time. And I've always I got forced into having to get really clear about my cash flow and cash flow planning. And part of that was because, particularly during the technology years, um, most of my clients were really big corporations, and and these would be six-figure contracts that I would have with them, you know, almost seven-figure contracts. And their payment schedule would maybe be 120 days, right?
Yeah.
And I'd be on the hook
Yeah.
for my suppliers and everything else, which, I would have invoices from my suppliers for $50,000, and they didn't expect to get paid
In
in
120 days.
120 days. So it meant that I had to get really good at my cash flow planning. And I've gotten better at it. It's like I run it now at 3 months out, always. I know where my money's coming in and where it's going. And if there's a gap between the two, it tells me right now I need to do something about it,
Mm,
instead of, oh my gosh, I don't have any money in the bank account. Instead, it gives me some runway to start generating business that then can take care of the cash flow. But I keep and I look at it daily. so I'm probably more anal than most people about it, but I look at it daily, so I know where I am at all times. And I'll share something else that I think it could be useful for people. From a personal standpoint, I wasn't as good personally as I was in my business. And where that really came back and became a problem for me is in 2006, I separated from my husband, and who was also my business partner. So it was not only a personal divorce, it was a business divorce too. And for all intents and purposes, what I did is I bought my way out of a marriage, which meant that I took on all the debt from our business, from personally, everything. And I was in significant debt. It was a very scary position. And I even explored bankruptcy. It's like, how am I ever going to get out from under this debt? And which completely goes against how I operate. It's like, it was horrible to even consider it. And so then what I said before is, like, when it looks like there are no options, look for where there's a solution. And so I kept looking. And what I did is I created a spreadsheet, which I still have. I still do this to this day. This is like since 2006 to the present, I do this. And I had everything that I owed. And I listed it on my spreadsheet in order of interest rate, what my highest interest rates down. And I went through everything where I paid my minimum. I had a certain amount of money I could pay every month, and I paid minimum amounts for everything except the one that was at the front of the list. And everything that was left over, I paid to that until it was gone. I cut the card up, it was out of there. And then I did the same thing. I had the same amount that I was paying. And I worked through it. And so I was, a few years ago, I was sharing with a group, a workshop that I was in, that some of my long-term goals, and one of my long-term goals was to be debt-free. And in the moment that I was sharing that, like, this was one of my long-term goals, I realized I was debt-free, other than my mortgage. It was like, I don't know any money. And I was so busy head down working my system that it didn't dawn on me that I'd gotten there. And everything gets paid off every month. That's it.
Yeah.
It's like, whatever it is, it gets paid off every month. And I have a really small, I have an $80,000 mortgage. Like, some places I know that's like a ridiculous mortgage, but I live in Toronto. That's like pocket change here for a mortgage.
Yeah.
Right. And, but I worked that system. And as I said, it's like, that's part of my personal cash flow management that I do to this day. So I manage it from both sides, and I pay very close attention to it.
That's amazing. Did you find once you realized that you were debt-free?
I cried.
Did you?
I cried on the spot. I cried.
Wow. Did it change your relationship with money and how you looked at business?
That's a good question. I guess it did, because the biggest thing for me was I felt a lot more freedom around it.
Yeah.
It was like suddenly I didn't feel like a burden. It was like I suddenly had a different level of freedom around it. And I will tell you, it was the first time in my life. I never have felt freedom around money. It was the first time that I felt that.
I sometimes talk about debt can be an anchor, and
Yeah.
it can make it that you feel like you don't have choice.
Yeah.
And so you definitely you cut the anchor.
Yeah. Yeah. But and again, back to that thing with perseverance, it didn't happen like boom. I worked this for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't a 2 month exercise. It wasn't a 1 year or 2 year exercise. It took me 10 years.
Wow.
Took me 10 years, but I never gave up.
Yeah.
You know, I never gave up.
I love that. When it comes to some of your numbers in your business, have you established some key performance indicators that you monitor? I know that in the past, you and I have chatted about lagging versus predictive. What indicators are you using to monitor the health of your business?
Well, I have my monthly number,
Okay.
right? Like I have my monthly number and it's really kind of weird indicators. Like this one is like one, like they're like, we all have maybe some quirky ones. Like one of the things I know that if this is not financial, but this is like a quick indicator to me that, that the wheels are wobbling. And if I don't put the corrections in, the wheels are going to come off. And this is if I am too busy to make my bed in the morning. That's like an immediate indicator to me. And this has been, I discovered this probably 20 years ago. And it's like, if I am too busy to make my bed, this is a really important indicator that things are getting out of control.
We need to
And
do
I
some
need,
alignment.
yeah, yeah. So I need to do something to pull it back into control. So that's like not a financial one, but it's a life one that I notice.
Mm.
And then financially is like I have that number, is like this is my minimum number. And if and that's not like I've got a huge excess after that, but this is like got to do that one. So I'm always looking at that. And that's why I say that 3 months out, that's what I'm looking for is where am I with my number? And then if there's any excess, does it go and letting it roll over into the next month and what does that do? And then when any excess, I'll see how it rolls over into the next month. But those are my indicators. And as soon as I have that is like I take it out and I set it aside. I have a liquid fund that I can tap into if I need to, like right away, if there's an investment, if there's an opportunity that I want to pursue, if there's a shortfall, because sometimes there are, how I can balance it out. But I always know that there's that little pot over there that helps me even out the tough times, or it lets me take advantage of some opportunities that I'm excited about.
Thank you for sharing that. I really love when people will talk numbers with me, so I appreciate that. The next question I have, I would like to talk a little bit more about the communication side, like your technical expertise.
Yeah.
Is it just me or is communication getting harder?
Um, I think technology, like I said earlier, technology really facilitates it in a lot of ways, and it creates so many barriers. So that part of it, I think, makes it tougher. But the truth of the matter is, it really comes back. We're all human. We're people.
Mm.
So the difficulties in communication have been the same difficulties that have always been there.
What do you think are the three biggest challenges as business owners, or three tips that you would give business owners around communication? Like, we know it's people to people, but beyond that, maybe it's even the crafting of the messages and
Yeah.
those types of activities. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I would say one of the biggest challenges is that we're not specific enough in understanding or identifying what is that we want and what we are asking other people to do for us. So we become very generalized in our communication. And as soon as you step away from being very specific, then the chances of you getting what you want decline very rapidly. So that's the biggest thing. It is like, what is it that you intend to accomplish through your communication? What do you intend to have happen very specifically? And so it can sound like goal setting. Some of it might be, but more specifically, I really relate to it as when we communicate in anything, whether it's our marketing, it's our one-on-one communication, it's to group, whatever it is, it's with an intention. We want something to happen, but we don't define that very well. So the chances of it happening get reduced. So that's the first thing, gaining real clarity about what our outcome is. And then, so that's the part about us. And that's about the last thing that's about us in communication. So the second rule, or second most important thing for everyone, and I don't care what kind of communication is, the thing for us to remember is it's not about you. It's always about the other person. Always, always, always. And it's hard to do. It's hard to step aside from our own agenda and be focused on the other person and supporting them and accomplishing what's important to them. And so giving that up, it seems like it shouldn't help us accomplish what we want, yet that is the only way we accomplish what we want, is by having it not be about us and it's about other people.
As a person who's been in business a while, and you think about all the pieces of communication you've seen over time, if you could give yourself a video, a book, a talk of some sort that you've seen over the years, and you go, oh, I just wish I'd seen that earlier. Startup Teresa, I wish you'd seen this.
Do you know, there are a few of them. Just about anything that Brene Brown has written. I think I wish, particularly me as a young woman, I wish I had been introduced to the conversations that she's introduced to so many people. I wish I had been introduced to those.
Yeah.
Because I had to really work. I had to really work to get my self-worth. Other people, I think this is true for many of us, but I didn't think very highly of myself. So I think that being introduced to that earlier would have been a really, really helpful thing.
She's done some groundbreaking work, that is for sure, and
Yeah.
introduced like the vulnerability piece in particular.
Yes.
How that's okay.
Yeah. And I think that that's particularly true. And this is absolutely true for me as a young woman coming into business. And I came into the business world in the 70s, and women didn't know how to be in business. We had no role models. We had very few role models. So who did we have as role models? Were men. So we were women trying to be in business like men. And it's taken me this long to learn, is like, why would I want to do that? It's like, that's crazy. Why would I want to give up all this power that I have as a woman to do that? So I don't know where that came about, but I don't know that there was just like one person or one place. That was definitely an evolution that that took me a long time to get there. But I'm pretty happy that I've gotten to where I am about that now.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully our younger generations get there faster.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have one question for you, and then we'll go to some questions from the audience. But is the word retire in your vocabulary?
No, no. You know, it's funny because I'm of a certain age. You know, I'm past retirement age. I collect a pension even. It's crazy to even think that, one, that I'm eligible, but I do that. But you know, so you know, it's when I turned 65, people started saying, well, aren't you going to retire soon? Aren't you going to retire soon? And I, it was kind of like, God, I haven't really thought about it. And part of that is because I'm passionate about what I do. I think you can tell I'm really passionate about what I do. I love it. And I love the contribution that I make to others. And I love the difference that I see that happens in people's lives. And so when I think about giving that up by retiring, it doesn't, in the traditional sense of retirement, it doesn't appeal to me. Now, what I do know, and my team around me and other people know around me, is I have no interest in working harder than I am right now or more than I'm working right now.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm working, I take a lot of time off. I do things that I love to do. And I'm not interested in starting to work really hard at this stage of the game. And I'm totally engaged in growing and building my business at the same
Yeah.
time. So,
I just thought I'd ask that question because I feel like when, especially talking to business owners and entrepreneurs who love what they do, that isn't a word.
yeah,
So I now have reframed it into power of choice. Are you working because you love to or because you have to? So
yeah, yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
awesome. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for questions. I see Miss Melanie is ready with a question.
Hi, Teresa, that was fascinating. So many questions. Anyway, but I wanted to thank you for sharing, especially the personal journey as well as with the finances, because it's like, what are we twinning right now? Like this is very relevant to me and very encouraging to hear how you work through it. Persistence and having a system. So that's great. I was curious. I'm a tech startup founder, and I'm interested in, particularly with tech startups, from your experience, what are some of the common stumbling blocks that you notice in, and it's specifically, so I'm a non-technical tech startup founder, in that, if I could frame it in that, and maybe women as well, if you could just kind of encapsulate that, any sort of like common stumbling blocks that you've noticed.
Yes. Well, interestingly enough, it was so great working with tech startups, and not a lot of them have women founders. There are a few more that do now than
Yeah.
there. It was all boys back then, and
Yeah.
now more and more there are more women, and but so a couple of different things. One, from a technology standpoint, one of the common things and the common problems is that, and this also I found ironically when I started really focusing a lot in financial services too, and they have the same thing in common, which you would never expect those two industries. And that is that they get really, really engrossed in their own tech speak, whatever their own tech speak is. And, you know, let me tell you how many gigahertz and how many gigabytes and how much RAM and how much, whatever it is. And nobody cares. What they want to know is, am I going to be able to download Netflix really fast? Right? So from a communication standpoint, the problem is that we get really engrossed in our own expertise. And here's how this is the way I describe it. And this is across any business. I say this to all of my clients. We get really caught up in being our product or our service expert. We become experts, our subject matter expertise, which is a good thing to have, except that that's not what people buy. Then if you look at it like a hierarchy, the next way up in the hierarchy is that you become a solution expert. I've got this solution and I'm in search of the problem for that solution. And again, it's a more sophisticated approach. They're both very commodity-based approaches in business. So it becomes a grind. It becomes very hard to get your results when you approach it that way. At the top, at the pinnacle of this hierarchy is when you're a problem expert. And that is when I was saying to Wendy, one of the lessons is understanding it's not about you, it's about them. It's about what they see as their problems. When you become a problem expert, what is it that they're concerned about? What is it that they're like, where's their pain? What is it, those points, and you speak to that. And then you have a solution that allows you to take away that pain. And oh, by the way, we have these services or these products that support our solution. Then it becomes a whole different thing. And if you're working in a technology company and you're the non-tech person, but you are leading the company, you started the company, it's really, you have to beware of getting bamboozled by the tech speak.
Yeah, thankfully yeah. Thankfully we're not in the space where we're inventing brand new technology, so that's good. We're more innovating on existing technology with the platform. So,
but you nonetheless, you have to be able to speak from a standpoint to the problem.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Always to the problem.
Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful. I love the hierarchy that you described because we offer a lot of marketing, so it's just good marketing, communications. Yeah, and I've caught myself using a term, even though because I'm still more technical than most of my small business clients as part of our solution, right? Helping solve their problems in this space. And I have to catch myself sometimes, but I'll say something like SEO, which is something we talk about all the time internally.
Right.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's excellent advice.
You're very welcome.
Excellent. Throwing it open. Thank you, Melanie. Any other questions out there? Oh, Andre, pulling you in.
No, Natalie can go first. Go ahead.
Oh, go, Natalie, go.
I've enjoyed this whole presentation. Thank you. And all the questions. So I have a question. How do you introduce the problem, especially in the written word?
Well, there's one thing is that you have to know who you're speaking to or who you're communicating with really well. So that means focusing. It can't be, this is not scattershot. It's got to be highly focused. And when you're highly focused, it means you have to understand them. You have to know who they are. You have to be in their world. You have to know more about them than they know about themselves, right? And when you do that, then you can speak to that immediately. If you're writing, you speak to it right away.
Okay.
And don't bury the lead.
What do you mean?
Don't bury the lead. A lot of times what will happen, that's an old newspaper phrase, is like, your headlines are to capture people. At the beginning, you capture people. The start of it is to get people's attention. Don't wait and save your good stuff for later on. It's too late. If you don't get their attention right away, they're not going to get to your good stuff later. Give them your good stuff up front.
Question, can I layer on top of that? Are people's attention spans diminishing and therefore we have to be even more careful not to bury the lead?
I mean, there's all sorts of studies that have been done on that. I don't know that people's attention span is any different. We are interested in what we're interested in.
Fair.
And I don't think that's ever changed. And right now we have more control over it than before. Like now we have more ability to choose, where before we were recipients of it. And so I don't know that our attention span is less or not,
Okay.
but we're interested in what we're interested in.
Yeah, for the right client, I think they're going to hear the message if you don't bury the lead.
Yeah, speak of something that people are interested in, that's important to them. If it's, as I was saying to Melanie, if it's about a problem that they're experiencing that they have not been able to solve, they're going to be interested.
Mhm.
Because the other thing is when I say it's not about you, it's about them, when your attention is on them, they're interested in themselves. If you're going to start talking about yourself, they're not interested in you. They don't care about you. I know that's harsh, but they don't. They care about themselves.
Yes.
So if you're, this is Natalie, and I don't know what kind of writing you do, but if I see from a marketing standpoint, a lot of companies, what they do is they begin by speaking about, let me tell you about what we do. Let me tell you about how long we've been in business. Let me tell you about how many locations we've been. Let me tell you about all of my credentials. Let me tell you all that stuff. And they're looking at their watch going, when are we going to get to the good stuff? Me. Right? It's like, it's about them. Get that's at the forefront. All of that stuff about you is later, much later.
Interesting. Andre.
The one thing I wanted to jump on what Teresa was talking about, especially in the startup phase, where you're talking about persistence.
Yeah.
What I discovered was persistence is good, but resilience is a lot more beneficial at the beginning stage, because you're kicked down and punched down to the ground so many times. And like for me, that's what I say. I got kicked down so many times. I got up every time. But
Yeah.
figuring out why I got kicked down was my goal, so I don't get kicked down for the same reasons.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is said properly in English, but in French, tenacity, a stubbornness to just keep moving forward against the current. Are skills either you're born with or you can grow, but those are it. Like to me, every time I got kicked down, I learned something new and I was growing.
Yep.
So
yeah.
Teresa, after what you've been talking about today, what are the 3 things we need to remember from today?
Why do I feel that there's an inside joke here?
There is an inside joke. He's using one of my own tools on me. So yeah, I mean, for me, like the big thing is that communication is at the heart of all of our success. And I don't just mean business success. I mean success in our relationships, our personal relationships. It is at the heart of all of that. And at the essence of that is what I just said. It's not about you. It's about the other person. When you are able to understand, you don't have to agree. And when you understand the other person, where they're coming from, it's like taking empathy and putting it on steroids. But when you keep altering and keep shifting your orientation to have it be about the other person, things turn out all right. And then I think And I think the other piece of it, and I hadn't planned this in advance, Wendy just told me that she wanted me to talk about it, is that whole piece, the journey of it. And it is tenacity, perseverance, and resilience. Those, I think, Andre, you said those beautifully.
That's awesome.
Just one last note, if you don't mind. This is not premeditated. I'm getting nothing in return for this, but Teresa's course, Encore Communication, was the best 12 hours I've ever spent to improve my communication. And I highly recommend it to anyone out there. And the Right to Connect in the top 3, like the biggest insight for me was, it's not about you, it's about them, right? So thanks again. I always learn something new, Teresa. Thanks again.
Oh, thank you, Andre. I appreciate it.
I have time for one more question. Francis.
Hi, thank you. That's awesome. Everything you've said there. And I'm like, money is near and dear to my heart. So I'd like to kind of go back to that. And it actually hits on communication. One of the things I find really challenging is helping people with their pricing. And it comes a lot to self-worth.
Yes.
And I try to tell them how much they're communicating by the pricing they're choosing. So have you had a journey around your pricing?
Oh my
And
God.
especially as it comes to coming out of debt, because that also
Francis, question of the day. That was amazing.
Oh my God. One of my coaches, it's such a perfect question. And I think as business people, it's one of the things that so many of us struggle. And you are absolutely right. I think it's completely tied to how we see ourselves and what we think we're worth. And I remember early days in my business that like many entrepreneurs, I had all of these things that I gave away for free as, quote, value add, right? I mean, like a lot of stuff. And my business coach, Dan Sullivan, said, Teresa, people will pay you for that. I went, get out of town. There's no way. In order for us to compete with this other stuff, I've got to do all of this consulting work. And he said, well, why don't you just try charging for it and see what happens? And I went, okay. And so I would love to say that I just was really proactive and went out there and did that, but I didn't. So fortunately, somebody else saved me from myself. And that was a client said, well, I'd like you to do this work. And how much do you charge for that? So I had to make something up on the spot because I was going to do it for free. And I made up a number. Like in the conversation, I made up the number. And without hesitation, he said, okay. And I went, oh, shit. Right?
That means there's money on the table.
I know. It was like, oh, too low. But I got paid for the first time. And then I started packaging it. And then I started charging for it. And I don't negotiate my fee ever. And from the beginning, I said, I have not negotiated my fee. It is like, this is my fee. This is what we're going to do. This is what you're going to get for this fee, but I don't negotiate it. And I never have. And even when things felt very dark for me financially, I didn't negotiate it. And I stayed with it and went with it. And when I've raised my fees, I've never had an issue with clients going, oh my God, you're raising your fees. They never have. They said, you know what? You're worth every penny. That's what they say. So rule of thumb, I would say, and I just had this conversation with a client of mine the other day. And I said, what number makes you really nervous? And they said that, and I said, add 20%.
Nervous plus 20%. There's your pricing.
Nervous plus 20%.
I love it.
Because it is just like the person who is limiting it is you. Do we have time that I can tell one more story about this?
You go, Teresa.
I had another experience with this. Is like one of the things that keeps reoccurring is my clients come to me to help them and for me to have tough conversations. So for example, I have a client who is in business with his wife, and she's a real bottleneck. And this is a big company. This is a $250,000 company, privately held. And she's a problem in the company. And their CFO is even a bigger problem. And I said, they're going to drive your company into the ground, and you've got to get rid of your CFO. He's like poison in your company. And the man said, yeah, I know. Would you talk to my wife about that? It's like, oh man, that is not a conversation. And I had another client, actually a board member for a technology firm that's headed by a young woman, and she started the company in her early 20s, and the board member said she's really great, but she has no executive presence. And we're worried about that. And I said, I know, I just coached her. And I was like, I would never have known she was the founder if somebody hadn't introduced her as that. He said, well, would you have a conversation with her about that? So I kept getting these requests for having these kinds of conversations. And another one of my coaches said, so how much do you charge for having those conversations? I said, I don't charge anything. I just have those conversations is because they're my clients, right? And he said, well, how much do you think you could charge for it? And I said, God, I was like, it took me completely off guard. So as another one, it was like, he said, just like create it, and you don't have to charge for it, but start working your own thinking towards what that value is, because right now you are undervaluing what you're providing there. So I say that is like, believe me, I still have these nerves. So I still don't charge for those conversations. I do them as part of the engagement with those.
Is it in the
clients.
package? Is it one difficult conversation or two, depending on the package you buy?
It's usually like, pardon my way of saying this, but it's usually there's a come to Jesus meeting. And my intention is when I have these conversations, that when that person I'm having a conversation, when they leave the conversation, that they feel uplifted and they feel like they're better off because of it. Not like I've gone in and cut them off at the knees and they've been debilitated. That's not my intention. My intention is to go in there and to give them something useful that, and then guide them on how they can move in a particular direction. And I'm really good at it. And but it's like it's like something I have to work on now. It's like, okay, so you don't get this solved. This is not one of those things you solve at one time. It just it rears its head in different areas.
Yeah, you have to work your way to it. So your right hand person has kind of made you a liar.
Oh no.
She gave us something to give to people today for free. And I just put it into the chat. Do you want to comment on what that is?
Fantastic. I would love to. Do you know, and Andre's gone through this and Kelsey's used it too, but all of these years that I've worked in communication, and that I've not just communication, but presentations. And I've had the great privilege of working with some amazing leaders and communicators. And there have been some consistencies about thank you, that's what it looks like. That there's consistency and the people who are really great. And I've boiled it down to 9 characteristics. And we have a scorecard that we're making available so that you can self-assess, see where you are on your journey, and where there's room for improvement, and where you feel like you've really got it handled. But that is, we have that available to all of you to, and you know, our scorecard, and check it out, and give you some insights into what it takes to be a great communicator.
Amazing, Teresa. And for those listening, it will be in the show notes. So Teresa, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I've greatly enjoyed our conversation. And the real bottom line is about perseverance and not about you.